Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J-Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. A new month has arrived, and so is the latest podcast detailing all that's happening in the world of sports, as this is the J-Reels Podcast with your host, J-Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we've turned the calendar now to the third month of the year, and we can start to see the sun peeking through the horizon. 2 weeks from yesterday will be Selection Sunday as far as the tournament goes, which will start 2 weeks from this coming, tomorrow. I was going to say this coming Thursday, but we all know that the tournament in earnest starts that Thursday into Friday, which will be after St. Patrick's Day. And with the playing games, I know the first four, Tuesday and Wednesday, to set us up for what's going to take place in March Madness, which everybody, I'm sure, is waiting with bated breath. We still have some time between now and then, but now that March is here and baseball's in full swing with the exhibition season, and got some interesting news and notes coming out of MLB, so I'll talk about that later on. But to start us off here, and I get it, this is a podcast that I don't like to get into regurgitated narratives. If anybody's listened to me from the beginning, I am sick and tired of what a lot of other talk shows, podcasts, TV shows, etc., when they get into the topics of pretty much the same old, whether it's the Dallas Cowboys, whether it's Dak Prescott, Jerry Jones, Patrick Mahomes, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Lakers, LeBron, which is going to segue right into that. But the only reason why I bring this up is because one reason and one reason only, and it has nothing to do with who's the greatest of all time and start comparing him to Jordan and the likes of Bill Russell or Will Chamberlain. I'm not going to do that. But we all know on Saturday night against the Denver Nuggets, LeBron James is now in a pantheon unlike any other. And he already had achieved that when he broke the all-time scoring record in NBA history. I believe it was against Oklahoma City Thunder last year. But now he's in a stratosphere that is untouchable. He reached the 40,000 point mark in his career to go on top of 11,000 rebounds. And he's about 153 assists away from 11,000. This is something that we're not going to see, I think, definitely in my lifetime. Who knows? Maybe even in my grandkids' lifetime, we probably won't see the likes of anything like this happening again. Which now begs the question, does LeBron James have the greatest career in NBA history? You can argue it because there's only one other player that I think would rival that, and that's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Yes, not even Michael Jordan could do that. And even though Jordan, we know his resume, not to unpack that, but for Kareem, throughout his career, dating back to when he was drafted into the league, 69-70, winning a title with the Bucks in 71, becoming an MVP 6 times over, 6-time NBA champion, the 38,000 points where he was number one in the history of the NBA up until last year, as I mentioned. And now you could pretty much move Kareem aside to put LeBron there because it's not about titles. To a certain extent, it's not even about MVPs because LeBron falls short of that when he's matched up against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because LeBron's 4 titles and 4 MVPs are too short of what Kareem did and obviously too short of what Michael Jordan did. I believe Michael had 5 regular season MVPs, but of course he had 6 finals MVPs as well. That's Jordan. But for LeBron, and for his career, day one, Cleveland at Sacramento when he was an 18-year-old to where he is right now. Even Kareem at 39, his last year in the 88-89 season, did not put up anything close to what LeBron's doing right now. And people could argue, as much as he takes care of himself, the great shape that he's in, so on and so forth, people want to say that that's performance enhancing, something that I've read in the last couple of days, not necessarily from media, but just haters that are out there. And I have to laugh at that because obviously he's never been tested positive for performance enhancing drugs. So I just wanted to get that out there because I know that's probably going to be some controversy when it's all said and done. But you got to give it up to this guy for what he's done throughout the course of his career and to perform at the level that he has. Now, granted, he's not the same guy dating back to his days in Miami, which were his halcyon days, or the days in Cleveland preceding that, and then even right after that, winning that title in 2016. And what he's done here in the Lakers kind of, I don't want to say get swept under the rug, because the Lakers are such a standard there for him and for them winning a title. I get it in the pandemic year, in the bubble in Orlando, but for LeBron to really, not to say cement his legacy because it's already been cemented, but you have to take this block of his career with the Lakers with a little bit of a grain of salt. And not to really get into that or unpack that, because to me it's about his whole career. But there's also been some rumblings recently as far as where does LeBron James stack in Laker history, which is that even a discussion? If the Lakers are going to retire his number or even put a statue outside of Crypto.com, Staples Center, etc., that's going to be a joke. But that's for another day to get into. But as far as overall his career, it's unparalleled. It's unrivaled. And Kareem is this close from matching it. And obviously Kareem has been long gone as far as his NBA career goes. LeBron is still blazing his trail. Who knows how much more he's going to play. We get it that his son Bronny now taking the lay of the land because he has not had a stellar college year at USC. And who knows if he's even going to be drafted next year. I'm sure if there was a mock draft as of right this second, who knows where he would fall, if he would even be drafted. But that's going to be a key contributor as to where LeBron may go or what his thought process is going to be, because as we all know, he wants to play with his son Bronny before he hangs up his Nikes. But you cannot even underestimate, or in this case, you can't hide the fact throughout his whole career, and it's still being written, which is crazy. To me, he has the best NBA career ever. That doesn't mean he's the GOAT. Two different discussions. People want to call Jordan the greatest of all time, and based on what I've seen when I watched Jordan play from that time when he came into the league in the 84-85 season up until, I'm going to say at the end of 98, I get it, he came back for those 2 years in Washington to where I believe at the age of 40, averaged 20 points a game. And here's the crazy thing. He played in all 82 games. Michael Jordan, even at 40. But even then, with those 2 years in Washington, and I get it that it doesn't really add much more to his legacy unless you want to talk about his consistency, playing in every game, not having to worry about the travel, his body breaking down or anything like that. And obviously it didn't break down because he played in every game. But when I look at this overall, to me, it's LeBron and everybody else as far as an NBA career. Greatest of all time? That's separate. And that's what I did not want to get into at this very moment, because to me, there isn't a discussion. And I get it. People are going to argue that. They're going to say that LeBron's had the best, not only career, but he's the GOAT based on what he's done throughout his now, 21-year career. And even though we could look at Kareem or even Jordan for that matter, and maybe there's a small faction that could say Bill Russell because of the championships that he won as a member of the Celtics, more as a player, but then later on as a player coach. But to me, it's LeBron and everybody else. And Saturday night, when he went past Michael Porter with a spin move, laid it up off the glass, that was just typical LeBron, even at this age, to know that he still has that first step, he still has the agility, he still has the uncanny athletic ability to get to the basket, not settle for jumpers, even in a three-point shooting league where, as we all know, he has his moments where he does that, but he can still get to the basket at will, and it's just a marvel to watch. And I'll stop extolling the just wondrous talents of LeBron at this present moment, but I had to start off with that because I could get into the Celtics, which I'll pivot there, and everybody knows I'm a Celtic fan, and it's a situation where they are just riding high. Not to say that they're being compared to the 86 team, but they're just a game off when you think about it. Because the 85-86 team, which is ranked as one of the greatest teams of all time, and for this Celtic team as of the 23-24 season to be just a game behind that record, and to think, when we take a look at the Celtic history, and we can look at the NBA history for that matter as well, but for the 72-73 Celtics, where a lot of people thought that team should have gone to an NBA final, and as it was the year after, they did doing so and also won a championship when they beat the Bucks in that 73-74 year. But remember, that 72-73 when they played the Knicks and they lost in a Game 7 in their building, if you recall. Now, John Havlicek, who, as we all know, one of the all-time greats, was hobbled in that series. I believe he did not play in Game 6. And then, of course, the Knicks won up in Boston there to get themselves back to an NBA final. But for this team, I've said this coming out of the All-Star break. I even said this sometime last week. It is championship win or bust for this team. And they've won 11 straight. And yesterday, they just blew the doors off of the Golden State Warriors to their third 50-point deficit this year. They beat the Nets by 50 right before the All-Star break. They beat the Pacers by 51. When was that? I guess November, December. That was actually probably before the play-in tournament. And then yesterday, 52 points, 140-88. Where second half, why bother watching? And this team has it tailor-made. They're going to wrap up the 1 seed. It's already a foregone conclusion, considering that they are 9 games in a loss and 8.5 over the Bucks in the Eastern Conference. And for this team, that Brad Stevens, the VP of basketball ops, has pushed all the chips to the middle of the table with the 2 big trades, bringing in Porzingis to trade the longtime fan favorite Marcus Smart, and then Drew Holiday right before the start of the season, bringing him in. And Porzingis, who didn't even play in the game yesterday. And that's going to be the one thing that if you're a Celtic fan, that question mark is going to be at the forefront of your brain. And this is now where some of the, I'm not going to say adversity, but this is where the pressure is going to lie with this team. Because for what they're going to do this regular season, now granted, they're probably going to win anywhere between 64, I'll say to 67 games. They may end up being 67-15. And to think, they could match the 2008 Celtics, who were 66-16, the last team that won an NBA final for the Celtics. And I understand the comparisons. It's going to happen. This is why sports talk radio, podcasts, the talking head shows, people like myself are going to want to roll their sleeves up and dive into this. But for me, this team, health, of course, is a big thing, but down the stretch of these games, as we've seen plenty of times with this team, and granted they bring in Drew Holiday, who is that veteran presence who knows how to win a title. Granted, it's his first year, and he's not the leader of the team, but whatever experience that he's going to infuse in that locker room or to the 2 young guns, Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown, you know he's going to do his damnedest to try to get his message or however he leads by example to them. And then you have Kristaps Porzingis, who I think is going to be key in this run once they get to April. Because if he's relatively healthy, and I get it, if it's a 3-1 series lead and they want to rest him, all right, fine, but he comes back for a Game 6. And I get it, you can't fool around when you get to the playoffs in those early rounds, especially round 1 or even in a conference semifinal. But for Porzingis, he's going to be enormous for the Celtics to get to the mountaintop. That's all there is to it. With his size, with his shooting ability, defense, low post game. Once upon a time, Kevin Durant dubbed him the unicorn, and unicorn for those reasons. And if he's going to be out for any, I'm not going to say extended period of time, but if he's going to be in and out and he's going to go through the final 22 games more out of the lineup and in and try to preserve him for the postseason, all right, I could get that and understand fully, but what is going to happen when you get to a round 1 or deeper into the playoffs, when you get into the rigors and the mental, emotional, just everything that's going to take out of these players, and especially a guy like Porzingis who may not have a lot to prove talent-wise, but certainly between the ears and in his chest is going to have to show not only to his coach, his teammates, but to the rest of the NBA, because he has not been on that type of stage in his career. And that day's coming. And I don't want to put it all on Porzingis because this is going to fall at the feet of Jason Tatum as well as Jalen Brown and the head coach. Remember, he's only a second-year head coach, and let's see what's going to happen crunch time where he's going to design a play, whether they're down by 2 or down by 3 with 2.3 seconds to go, and the series is tied at 2 in a conference final. All these things you have to put into the mix here. And again, those questions aren't going to be answered until we get to the spring. I understand that. But considering what they're doing, and you know me, just because of this 11-game winning streak and number one seed in the conference, I'm not breaking out the pom-poms. The only time I'll break out the pom-poms is when they win a title. That's it. Because division titles, conference championships, I don't want to hear it. Been there, done that, seen that. No, I want the brass ring as a fan, and a longtime fan at that. So for those out there that say, come on, J Reels, they're on this torrid stretch. They're playing their best basketball all year. They're going to cruise to a one seed in the Eastern Conference. All that, yes. Are those facts? Absolutely. Barring some major injuries here over the course of the last 24 games or so. But seen it, watched it, write the book, wear the t-shirt, whatever. Unless we get to the final seconds of a series and championship deciding game, wake me up. That's all I'll say about the Celtics. Let me move on here. I know you've had a couple of injuries here as of late to put on your radar. The Clippers lose Russell Westbrook, who injured his hand against the Wizards on Thursday, I believe, or maybe that was Friday. And for Westbrook, who's been the consummate teammate, a guy that has checked the ego to the side, came back for that 2-year deal. I believe it was $4 million. He didn't come back for a ton of money, maybe $5 million tops, and has been a guy to bring that energy even at this stage of his career, checking that ego aside, and has put forth for him and for the team overall a solid year. And who knows how long he's going to be out. I know Tyronn Lue is keeping his fingers crossed to hope that he can be back come playoff time. But the Clippers, who are trying to get to their first NBA final, especially with the way their team has been structured, obviously Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, you got to think about James Harden. I totally forgot about him the other day when I'm talking about the Clipper team, when they lost that brutal game to the Lakers in their building, or really in the Lakers building because they share the Staples Crypto.com arena. But Westbrook, not to say that's going to be a huge loss, but a guy coming off the bench, and again, even with the spark that he provides and the passion that he has for the game, again, how they're going to piecemeal that is going to be interesting to see. Jalen Brunson, we got to see the extent of his injury last night against the Cavs, who were able to beat Cleveland as they snapped a losing streak. And for the Knicks, who are trying to, even themselves, mass unit without OG Anunoby and Julius Randle, now are holding their bated breaths to see whether or not Brunson's going to be out for any significant amount of time. And he went down the first quarter to where a non-contact play, it was reported that he banged knees with his teammate, Isaiah Hartenstein, where he came across the screen, took a jump shot, and then fell awkwardly to the floor. He couldn't even get up, had to be helped off. X-rays show that they were negative, but I'm sure an MRI and a lot more extensive, a deeper look as to what's going to happen here, if he's going to be on the shelf for any significant amount of time. Will he be able to come back where the Knicks will be at home to play the Hawks tomorrow? And the Hawks have been in New York, it seems like since last century, because they played the Nets Thursday, Saturday, and they're going to play the Knicks here on Tuesday. So they've had the whole week here in New York. And let's see if they could come out with a win, because they weren't able to win in Brooklyn. And without Brunson, who knows, that could be a much more easier task for the Hawks, who are struggling there at the bottom of the Eastern Conference play-in bracket, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we'll see how that's going to unfold with the Knicks. And then you had a scenario last night where the Phoenix Suns, and I get it that Yusuf Nurkic, 31 rebounds, hasn't been matched in, 14 years, where Kevin Love, I believe, had that 31, I think it was 32 points and 31 rebounds when he was a member of the T-Wolves. And Nurkic, who had a huge game last night, 31 rebounds as they tried to come from behind against the Oklahoma City Thunder and fell short. But a lot of the post-game was for Frank Vogel, the coach, as well as Nurkic, to talk about the refs, but more so to complain, to say, hey, I had 31 rebounds and all I got was about 4 free throws throughout the course of the game. And as it was, they were trailing big, although they made a furious attempt to come back and see if they could prevail when it was all said and done, but they weren't able to do so. And OKC, with that win last night, propelled them to first place in the Western Conference. But who knows if there's going to be any aftermath between what Frank Vogel said in the postgame, pretty much concurring with Nurkic about the officiating, and then Nurkic, even with that monumental effort on the glass, was unable to get to the charity stripe and add more points to that comeback as they fall short against the Thunder. And when we take a look throughout the sport, I know the Bucks have played well here, winners of 5 straight, and they've overtaken the Cavs. And remember, last week I talked about that's going to be an interesting race, because if you're Cleveland and JB Bickerstaff, the coach, I would think that you would want to get the 2 seed in the conference, because that means you'll have the first 2 rounds, if you get that far, with the home court advantage. So let's say if Cleveland were to leapfrog over the Bucks and get the 2 seed when its season is complete, and for them to have the Bucks come into their building for a Game 7 potentially, I would think they'd rather have that as opposed to go to Milwaukee to play a Game 7 and have the Bucks with the home court advantage. So just keep that in mind as we move along the season. Knicks, who are now 4 back behind Cleveland in the loss, so they probably will be somewhere between 4 and I'll say 6. I won't go as far as 7, even though Miami at the 7 seed right now, they're a half game behind the Orlando Magic, who the Magic are just a half game behind the Sixers, who currently have the 5 seed. So you have a race there between 4 and I'll say 7 with Miami there. So you have Indiana at 8 after that, who are currently 2 behind the Heat in the East. Then follow that up by the Bulls, Hawks, and the Nets. Even with those 2 wins, they were able to creep up, and now we're just 2 games behind the Hawks for the 10th spot in the East. And that's huge, because think about it. They were actually 4 back before it all started, and I'd even take that into consideration come Thursday's podcast. But now, at least they're within distance of getting that 10th seed in the East. Who knows if Kevin Ollie, the new coach, as Jock Vaughn was jettisoned right before the All-Star break, whether or not he's going to be able to rally the troops to see whether or not that they're going to have any type of push to squeeze in and see if they can have at least 1 shot, maybe even 2, to make it into the postseason come the middle of April. I would think that's not going to be the case, but you have that in the East. And then out West, as I mentioned, OKC with a half game, but 1 in the loss over Minnesota. Denver tied with Minnesota for 2nd place, same record, 42-19. Both of those teams are just a half game back of the OKC Thunder. Then you have the Clippers, who are 1 in the loss, but 2 back in the standings behind Denver. So you have those 4 teams, even with the Clippers, still a couple games behind them, but you have 4 teams separated by just 2 games, and 2 in the loss for that matter. Then you have New Orleans at 5. Big gap there between the Clippers and Pelicans. Phoenix, who is now on the outside. Remember, Phoenix, as of last week, they were in the 5 seed. And granted that they're all separated by 2 games, those 4 teams, New Orleans, Sacramento, Phoenix, and Dallas, that's the 5, 6, 7, and 8 seeds in the West. And we talked about Phoenix losing last night. But now Phoenix goes from being a 5 seed to now part of the play-in scenario as they're the 7 seed in the conference. But again, that could shift here within a matter of days. As I mentioned, those 4 teams are separated by 2 games. And then your 9th and 10th seeds have the Warriors, who, even with that loss last night to the Celtics, they are percentage points, or actually 1 percentage point ahead of the Lakers, 32-28. Lakers are 33-29. So the Warriors do have, 1 game in hand. Let me see if I have my math correct. 2 games in hand over the Lakers. So that's something to keep in mind, as Golden State now 9th. And I believe that's the highest they've been in quite some time. And the Lakers floundering there as they lost to Denver in the game where LeBron eclipsed 40,000 points. That's what I have with the association. Now, I want to talk some college basketball, and I definitely want to get to Caitlin Clark, but I'll do that in a second. You have a scenario where the Houston Cougars are now the number 1 ranked team in the nation based on what happened with UConn and even Purdue over the course of the last couple of weeks. And I would think Houston will still remain there once the rankings come out later today. So Houston at the top spot brings you back to the days of Akeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, Michael Young, Phi Slamma Jamma, and teams like that. But for the Cougars, as they will remain in the top spot as of now, one team that's going to fall out of the top 10 is going to be Kansas. They lost to BYU, as we talked about earlier last week, and then they lose again. They actually have 7 conference losses. Big 12, as they lost to Baylor. And for Kansas, them falling out of the top 10, and this was a team that was ranked in the top 4 as early as, 2.5 weeks ago. And a lot of people may have thought that they could have been a 1 seed. As it is, they can't even win their conference regular season, and who knows what's going to happen there with the Big 12 conference if they can run the table then. But with 7 conference losses and Bill Self, the ship is starting to sink there a little bit. Remember, they won a title just 2 years ago, and even though there isn't a lot of worry with the head coach and his team, but they have not played well, and this is not the time to start to falter here as we're just about a week or so, maybe 8 days from conference championship play. So I don't know if Kansas is going to be able to regroup here. They do have some time before they get to the end of the regular season. And then obviously when we talk about all the conferences going through their tournaments, but doesn't look good for the Jayhawks as they try to see if they could get themselves back to respectability and even maybe make a push there in the Big 12 tournament when we get to that next week. But other than that, in college basketball, everything remains the same as I take a look at the rankings. And again, that's going to change as of today. You would think Houston's going to be there with UConn, Purdue. As it is, the coaches poll has UConn 2 and Purdue 3. That may stay the same, you would think, as we get to later on this afternoon with Purdue number 2 in the AP Top 25 and UConn 3. Tennessee 4, Marquette 5, Arizona 6, Kansas 7, but they're going to fall out. Iowa State, North Carolina, and Duke round out the top 10. And college basketball, I would think once you get to next week, the end of the regular season, and then with the conference tournaments, that's when things are going to start to go haywire. What team could run the table to see if they could get themselves in a better seed, better stead, teams that are on the bubble, teams that are looking to see if they could have a run in them to get to a conference championship and then see where the chips fall once you get to, what will that be, March 21st when the tournament again begins in earnest. I understand it'll start on the 19th. We all know that with the first 4. But college basketball, as of right this second, relatively status quo. There isn't much more I could say about it, people. As take a look here, am I going to get crazy about UConn winning the Big East regular season outright for the first time in 25 years? I'm not going to get crazy. And Purdue doing the same. Well, they clinched their second straight Big Ten title in the regular season. But is that anything to get crazy about? I don't think so. So that's what we have there with the college basketball. Now I'm going to pivot with Caitlin Clark and her NCAA scoring record. We know she broke the women's record there a few weeks ago when she beat Kelsey Plum's all-time record. And for Caitlin Clark, who's on this magical run dating back to last year, and she already has announced that she's going to come out and put herself in the WNBA draft, which I believe is what? I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head. My apologies. I know the season usually starts around Memorial Day weekend, and I would think the draft is probably going to be right after the tournament for the women's, probably sometime a week after that. I don't think it'd be the same week, but anyway, I digress. But for Caitlin Clark to now pass Pistol Pete Maravich, LSU Tigers, dating back to 1967 through 70, and I get it. It's an achievement for Caitlin Clark. For women's hoops, fantastic. And this isn't a thing, people. Let me just put this out there right now. This isn't a thing about women versus men. This isn't a thing about, the men's sport is a lot more under the watchful eye of the sports fan than women's. Nothing to do with that. Zero. To me, I have 2 problems with this. The first one being that Pete Maravich scoring record, I believe it was 3,667 points that he scored. He did that in 3 years. Caitlin Clark is in her 4th year. So that's number 1. And number 2, back then in college, there was no 3-point shot. So Pistol Pete, who she's compared to based on her long distance prowess, shooting from the logo, 3-pointers, etc., Pistol Pete did the same thing. And if there was a 3-point shot, he would have a lot more points, minus the 1 year that he did not play, that final year at LSU. So yes, I get it that she passed him based on the numbers. And for some people, they're going to say, well, that's the record. Okay, fine. But not in my eyes. Again, 3 years to 4, Maravich to Clark, and no three-point shot for Maravich, where obviously Caitlin Clark has the three-point line that attributes to a lot of the points that she's accumulated over her college career. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Has nothing to do with the women's, men's, what game is better, what game has more watches, follows, likes, etc. Not this guy. People know me right down the middle. Play it fair. And that's how I'm going to look at it. If Maravich played 4 years at LSU, and I get it, then you'd have to look at the three-point shot on top of that. But if he played 4 years and had X amount of points and she passed that, at least we could look at that and say, well, hey, he played 4, she played 4. Okay, fine. Three-point shot's a biggie. But the amount of work during that tenure, if it was matched by the amount of years that were played for Maravich, similar to Clark, the argument would be lessened. But it only gets heightened because of those two things. And that's why, to me, granted that it's in the record books, that's like saying, does Barry Bonds hold the all-time single-season home run record? Or do you want to say Aaron Judge, since he beat Roger Maris 2 years ago when he broke the AL record when he won the MVP in 2022? And I get it. Bonds' number, it's in the record books, etc. But that's where the asterisk comes in because of the alleged steroid use. And people may think that Judge holds the record because of what Bonds did going back to, 2001. That's my argument. All right, so let me pivot there from college and now lace up the skates to go around the ice in the NHL. And this one's going to be interesting because I talked about this on Monday's podcast last Monday based on the weekend that Ranger rookie Matt Rempe had. And now I'm going to bring it up again. But for this reason, as far as the sport overall. Saturday night, there was a little bit of hype. And for yours truly, that actually turned on the TV to watch the Rangers play the Maple Leafs up in Toronto. And the actual thought that I had was, I can't believe I'm actually going to watch this. Because of the anticipation between the rookie Ranger tough guy and the former Ranger resident tough guy of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who, it's arguable, but there are people that will say pound for pound is the toughest guy in the National Hockey League, and that's a one Ryan Reaves. And I turned it on, and I was hoping to get what I was anticipating maybe a couple of minutes into the game, because as you've watched or followed, maybe you haven't, for those who don't follow hockey or don't care, I get it. But if you're watching on YouTube, the t-shirt says it all. And if you're listening to this, whether Apple, Spotify, jreels.com, or any podcast platform, you're going to have to go to the YouTube channel to see what shirt I'm wearing. So that'll also be a little bit of a shameless plug. But for Ryan Reaves to be asked prior to the game about Rempe and what he's done here in the early part of his career, and mind you, it's just a handful of games. He had gotten into those couple of fights last weekend in Philadelphia against Nicolas Deslauriers, and then in Columbus against Matthew Olivier, where he got his first loss, and Olivier got some good shots on Rempe. And with everything leading up to the game there Saturday night, asking Reaves what it's like to be a tough guy in the league. What do you think about this kid, 21 years old, coming in, trying to make a name, trying to do what the predecessors before him to get that reputation, to get the, not only just the experience, but fighting the tougher guys in the sport. And, he said all the right things for the 5 of you that are interested out there, but this is the reason why I bring it up. It adds life to the sport. I mentioned this on Monday's podcast last week. There is a level of expectation, and mind you, I watched the first two periods, and they weren't on the ice until you got to the second period, or maybe it was late first period. And then when 2 periods went by, and I believe the score was 2-2, I said, these guys aren't going to fight in the third period. And then what happens? They ended up fighting. And I'll get to that in a second. But for this game, and I understand it's a meaningless regular season game in the grand scheme of things, and I know Toronto and the Rangers, good litmus tests for both teams, because Toronto's in the mix there, as we know, in the Atlantic, and the Rangers looking to get the top spot, not only just in the East, but overall as far as the President's Trophy being the best team in the league. And to have just two combatants, tough guys that people probably couldn't pick out of a lineup. Why is that such a big deal? Well, here it is. And I'll try to be as concise as possible. It adds interest, It adds that expectation that I mentioned and an element that normally doesn't happen in a regular NHL regular season game. But on top of that, it brings you back to yesteryear. Remember when Bob Probert fought Ty Domi the first time, and I was in the building, February 9th, 1992, how they went at it, and then you had a whole offseason. Everybody looked at the schedule for the 92-93 season, and December 2nd, 1992, it was circled. Red Wings coming to the Garden to play the Rangers. And 46 seconds into the game, what happened? One of the best fights you'll ever see, one of the great fights of all time. Look it up on YouTube. Bob Probert, the GOAT, no ifs, ands, buts, babies about it, against Ty Domi. And you be the judge and get back to me in the comments. And I get it, the NHL stepped in. Oh, we don't want this to be a sideshow. Oh, if this is going to be a situation where the fight or even the pregame, they had to even go to these guys to tell them, you got to temper this down. Nonsense. Any type of, I'm not going to say criticism because this isn't a critique by any stretch, but any type of publicity when it comes to a regular season National Hockey League, they should be welcoming this with open arms because nobody cares about the regular season. Same for the NBA for that matter. And to have what happened there Saturday night, and I thought, even at the time, the Maple Leafs, I believe, it was 2-2 the score, and with about less than 6 minutes to go in the game. And mind you, Matt Rempe ran a defenseman earlier in the game, a guy that they acquired from Anaheim, I can't pronounce his last name, Lyubushkin, I believe is his name. And if I butchered it, my apologies. But he ran him in the second period, knocked him out of the game, didn't come back. And even though when Rempe and Reaves met there by the Ranger bench, where Reaves cross-checked Rempe across the chest, and even Rempe had to look at the bench to almost get permission on whether or not to go after him. And I get it, it was at the end of his shift too. It wasn't right off the face-off where guys are fresh, right off the bench, ready to go. But what you saw there, center ice, the gloves drop, face-off, man, that's a sight to see. And for those who want fighting out of the National Hockey League, how do you think the fans reacted once they dropped the gloves there that late in the game? I didn't hear any boos. I didn't hear people running to the exits. And I didn't hear people turn their backs. And the building was in complete silence. So if you mean to tell me that fighting is a detriment to the sport, you're off your rocker. And people want to talk about entertainment. Well, sports are entertainment. Well, guess what? When you have these resident tough guys in the league, part of the entertainment comes from their physicality. Now, is this going to be sustainable? Because I've held out a little bit of hope to think that Rempe and this, I'll say this resurgence. Now, this may be a comet in the sky when it's all said and done, and deep in my gut, that's probably going to be the case. But maybe could GMs just think twice about keeping a roster spot open for a resident tough guy. Now, based on a comment that I got on my Instagram feed, somebody told me, and although he's making a lot of sense, I'm trying to get a little bit more information from this guy because I maybe even have him on the podcast, but he said that even going back to junior, they're not teaching, or I don't want to say breeding, that's too strong of a word, but they're not having the young guy come through the ranks, junior hockey in Canada, as the tough guy, meaning that his job is strictly to be a policeman on the ice to protect his teammates, players, etc. And I understand the game has evolved to a point where that NHL, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it is the Ice Age, or maybe even the Stone Age, any age. It's long past in our deepest rearview mirror, and the genie's already out of the bottle. So the sport is going to be what it is. But it's added that infusion of excitement. I anticipate watching a Ranger game, and I hate the Rangers. And if you haven't watched, I put up a vlog about it when I went to the Stadium Series outdoor game 2 weeks ago yesterday, detailing my disdain for the Broadway blue shirt. So you definitely got to watch that. But one more time, before I move on, the NHL, to have tough guys like this and for this to be sustainable, it's probably not going to happen. I would only hope that for whatever the reason, owners, GMs, they'll come together and say, hey, maybe we should have a tough guy on our team. And as it is, think about this. The Devils, with the trade deadline this coming Friday, they acquired Curtis McDermott from the Avalanche to bring in that element based on what you saw there at the Prudential Center, what was it, a week ago this past Thursday, where he elbowed Nathan Bastian, randomly got a match penalty, and even though Bastian fought Jacob Trouba later on in the game, but now you bring in McDermott, who's been a known tough guy for many years, LA Kings, Colorado, etc. So when the Devils and Rangers play again, I got to check the schedule. Now you have a guy in there that's going to go toe-to-toe, or at least maybe not nose-to-nose, considering that Rempe 6'7", but there's going to be no backing down. It's part of the sport, like it says on the t-shirt. Oh my God. I mean, I don't know how much more. I could spend literally 3 hours talking about this. And I'll pivot from here. But to me, the element of the tough guy, of the just fighting, the intimidation, the physicality, the sending a message, and I don't want to hear, oh, that's Neanderthal, that's prehistoric. Come on, J Reels. The game has evolved since then. Well, yes, I understand that there's going to be rules implemented with the instigator and all this nonsense, which I couldn't stand. That's going back to the 80s when he implemented that rule. But unless they're going to get rid of it altogether, and really they've already phased the tough guy out of here, unless they're going to get rid of it altogether, then don't have it. Then it won't be a discussion. But you still have guys out there, and that's why Rempe has put this back on the map, at least for right now. Is it going to have any legs? I sincerely doubt it. But it remains to be seen. And like I mentioned, the trade deadline is forthcoming. And for the Canucks, who re-signed one of their top players, Elias Patterson, 8 years, $92 million deal, having a huge year, 29 goals to go along with the JT Millers of the world, and guys that are having huge years for Vancouver who are looking to see whether or not they could be the team that comes out of the West with 85 points right now in the conference, which is tops. In front of the Winnipeg Jets, who currently are just 2 points behind them, even Dallas for that matter, as that's a logjam there in the Central. So we'll see what's going to happen here with the trades. To me, nothing really major has happened here over the course of, I guess, these last couple of weeks. And there have been a couple of trades. I know I mentioned McDermott is one. And let's see what's going to come down the pike. Now, Thursday's podcast, I'll get into it a little bit more as to who gets traded. But the deadline is Friday. I believe, 3 or 4 p.m. the latest. So I'll have my fingers on the pulse when it comes to that. And let's see what else we have. NHL, other than that, it's pretty much status quo. Now, I didn't get into the NBA schedule this week as to who's going to be playing. I know I mentioned Knicks and Hawks. But the NHL is going to be fascinating here because tonight you have the Panthers invading the Garden to play the Rangers. And the Panthers are currently tops now in the East, 86 points. And I take that back. Here I am thinking that the Canucks have the most points in the sport when it's actually the Florida Panthers, and they're in the middle of a 4-game winning streak. They shut out the Red Wings over the weekend to continue that streak, and now coming to the Garden with the most wins in the sport, beating past the Rangers, because on Thursday we talked about how the Rangers had the most wins at 40. So that is going to be a matchup that a lot will watch, and I'll certainly be on top of, as the Panthers are in town to not only play the Rangers tonight, but the Devils tomorrow. So we'll keep an eye on that. And then you have, I think Boston later on this week is going to play Toronto. So those are two teams separated by 6 points there in the Atlantic. Rangers also have a 6-point lead over the Hurricanes in the Metropolitan. We talked about the Central with the Jets, Stars, tied at 83. The Jets have more wins. That's why they're in first place, 39 and 37. Although the Jets have 3 games in hand, just keep that in mind, over Dallas. And then Colorado is 4 points behind both of those teams in the division. And as I mentioned, Vancouver, 85, 9 points, as Edmonton has now won 4 in a row and actually have gone past the Golden Knights, who have not played well here as of, I would say, maybe the last 2-3 weeks. Edmonton now just 9 points behind the Canucks. I don't know if they're going to catch them when it's all said and done, but keep this in mind. They have 4 games in hand against the Canucks. So who knows? When it's all said and done, could they even catch Vancouver, which would be a remarkable achievement, as I mentioned on the podcast weeks ago, where they started off, 2-10, had an 8-game winning streak on top of a 16-game winning streak, and now they're actually less than 10 points away with 4 games in hand to see whether or not they're going to have a push there for first place in the Pacific. So maybe that's a race that we'll have to watch out for in the NHL. Besides that, that's what we have there on the ice. Now let me turn my attention to some Major League Baseball as I lace up the cleats and get in the batter's box for you guys and gals. Baseball at this very moment, you had another big free agent sign over the weekend, that being Matt Chapman, the former Toronto Blue Jay third baseman. 3 years, $54 million, includes opt-outs after this year and next, similar to what Cody Bellinger got with the Cubs. And I know I didn't get into his contract in total back, what was it? I think it was last Monday, but didn't Bellinger sign sometime the previous Thursday or Friday? Well, Bellinger could opt out after next year, provided that his numbers are better than last year. And the same for Matt Chapman. So if he has a bigger offensive year this upcoming year than last year with Toronto, then he could opt out and get a bigger deal. So 3 for 54. I know the Giants are trying to put this team together. They brought in the kid from Korea. They bring back Mitch Haniger in the trade there for Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray, that deal, he goes back to Seattle. So Haniger's gone. They bring in Ray. And they've tried to make these moves. They've tried to at least fortify their roster with veteran players and to have some names there that people do know of. Are they superstar players? No. But the Giants, third in their division at right this moment, because you would think the Padres have better talent, even without Blake Snell. I'll get to him in a second. As your starter, and the Dodgers are the Dodgers, as we all know, it's World Series and 115 wins or bust for LA. But for the Giants, it's a move that in the short term looks good. They're not paying a ton of money. They could put him there with the infielder, match him up there with, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, with the Korean guy, the Korean player. My apologies. But for the Giants, they had to do something. And if this was their something, then I guess it's better than nothing. But as far as Blake Snell goes, I read a report that maybe the Phillies, now I don't know how big this is going to be because the Phillies gave a 3-year extension to Zack Wheeler. 3 years, $126 million. So he's getting Scherzer, Verlander money, a smidge below that. But the Phillies, who we understand, they got plenty of money, big market, etc. There were talks that maybe Snell will go to Philadelphia on that smaller deal, maybe that 2-year deal where he could opt out after next year, or if he does the 3-year route where if he doesn't do well this year, he could opt out after next year. Who knows? But my eye caught that. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. Anything can happen at any point because now that we're well into March and with Snell not working and same for Jordan Montgomery, these guys are going to have to sign at some point. And if that means Snell's going to have to sign a lesser deal, even with a contending team, I'm sure you take it. What that dollar amount is, that wasn't revealed in this rumor or report, whatever you want to call it. But time is ticking. So for Jordan Montgomery and for Blake Snell, those are two guys that are tops when it comes to starting pitching. And we're going to have to wait and see on those guys. I couldn't tell you where they're going to go. So Wheeler gets his deal, and he was going to be a free agent after this year. And mind you, they already signed Aaron Nola to that big deal in the offseason. 7 years, $172 million. So they got their top two. Could Snell be a part of that mix? We shall wait and see. And then for the Brave fan, this may not be a big deal, but Ronald Acuna Jr. has an issue with his knee that was operated on when he tore his ACL down in Miami a few years back. What was that, 2021? Well, the meniscus in that knee has been flaring up to the point where it doesn't claim to be serious. There needs to be further evaluation, but Brian Snitker, the manager, is trying to be optimistic. I don't know if he's just saying that, trying not to say, oh, everything's okay, or maybe just making it worse than what it is. Who knows? But I'm sure once the MRI or whatever test that he's going to have to take to see how solid that knee is going to be, I'm sure he's going to get his time in, whether it's via rehab or he's going to be played sparingly throughout the rest of the spring. But the reigning MVP of the NL, I know that's going to be a big blow if Acuna is going to be out for any extended period of time. Now, they have a ton of resources. They have players abound. I get it that even if Acuna goes out for, let's say, a month, and I'm not trying to speculate that by any stretch, but if he's going to be down for any significant amount of time, They still have Austin Riley. They still have Matt Olson. They still have Ozzie Albies. They still have Michael Harris. They have a ton of guys. So it's not as if losing him, although it would hurt, but it's not the end-all be-all for a team that is going to have big aspirations this year. After what happened last year, 104 wins, losing to the Phillies again in the divisional series, a lot is being put forth here by this Brave team to go back to a World Series and win one like they did back in 2021. So we'll keep our eye on that. And let me wrap up here with the footballs. There are a couple of news and notes here. Actually, there's quite a few when I think about it. The first thing I want to get to, and sad news, twofold. First one being Chris Mortensen. ESPN, the longtime NFL insider, the Mort Report, everybody. He was the guy that everybody looked to for anything that was happening in the league, especially during a time where the insider wasn't even in vogue. Now, you had a lot of beat writers that were out on the scene trying to get that story, whether it was Will McDonough, the Peter Kings of the world, as we know, Gary Myers, etc. But that was more from a local, even national standpoint. But the guy who really put that on the map as far as being the one in front of the camera to get into the latest and greatest in the NFL, that was Chris Mortensen. Well, sadly, he passed away yesterday, age of 72. I believe, 6-7 years ago, he was diagnosed of having throat cancer. You could tell it was starting to wear on him, but he was a warrior. He fought it out even, 2016, almost 8 years later after he was diagnosed. And I know it's going to sound silly, especially at this point, because we know how much Adam Schefter reveres Chris Mortensen, but I almost thought that was a slap in the face to Chris Mortensen, who was the longtime guy there at ESPN, primetime, etc. And for Schefter to be brought in, and he was a guy I believe was on the NFL Network before they poached him, or maybe they didn't. Maybe his contract was up there and he moved on to the worldwide leader of sports. But to have two guys like that under the same roof, and as a fan, you thought, wait a minute, how is this guy all of a sudden going to pretty much take Mortensen's job and overshadow Mortensen? But he was the good sport, great teammate, brought on Schefter with a lot of class, no clashes, at least that I didn't hear of or were reported over the years. And for Mortensen to have that high esteem job, and I say esteem because in this day and age, when we look at the landscape of media and all the insiders that we could talk about, from the Ken Rosenthal's in baseball to the Adrian Wojnarowski's in basketball, to go down the list. There's just so many of them. And he was, is it strong to say a pioneer? Maybe, but he has that spot. He's that guy. When you thought of the NFL, especially in the 90s, who to go to for that story, rumor, is this true, etc., was Chris Mortensen. Thoughts to his family, friends, ESPN, the entire National Football League. That's a huge loss. Really is. Then you had the Steelers, Andy Russell, the linebacker who went to 7 Pro Bowls, was part of the first 2 Steelers Super Bowl victories in 9 and 10 in the mid-70s. He also passed away at the age of 82. I don't believe he's a Hall of Famer. That I should know off the top of my head as a Steeler fan, because when you think about the Hall of Famers and linebackers, you're thinking off the top of your head, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham. Those two guys, and I know Jack Ham had some nice things to say about Andy Russell as a guy who had took him under his wing, showed him the ropes of what it's like to be a professional in the NFL, and learned a lot from Andy during his early playing days. And we all know Jack Ham, all-time great, a guy that is in the top 100, I would believe, as far as the NFL all-time players are concerned. Yeah, he is a Steeler Hall of Famer, which is no shock there, but he's not a Hall of Famer overall. To think, he was a 16th round pick, and now the NFL has 7 rounds. And did make the 7 Pro Bowls, but to me, when you think of a guy that made it into Hall of Fame, you're going to think of all pros, first or second team, and he made 1 first team All Pro back in 1975, 3 second team, all right, fine, 68, 70, and 72, but when you compare him to just his former teammates, definitely not going to stack, because those are multiple, and not even just all NFL, but first team all NFL players. So thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Russell family, Steeler family, NFL, etc. 2 big losses and sad ones there in the NFL. Now, a couple other things before I sign off. The Buccaneers signed Mike Evans, 2 years, $52 million, $35 million guaranteed. That's huge because for the Buccaneers, a guy like Mike Evans, who I'm sure could maybe go onto another team, try to even ring chase for that matter, but decides to stay in Tampa. I believe he's been there for 9 years, 9 1,000-yard seasons. He's definitely on the verge of going to a Hall of Fame ceremony for his own right based on that resume. Still have to wait and see how it's going to play out because I know Mike Evans has been on a bunch of bad teams. Granted, he did win a Super Bowl a few years ago with the Bucs and Tom Brady, but he's had a very consistent and stellar career. And with a lot of these wide receivers going into the Hall of Fame based on the style of play of the NFL in this passing league that we live in, who knows when it's all said and done, he may end up wearing the gold jacket. Then, speaking of the Steelers, you also had a scenario where the GM Omar Khan in the Combine said that he has complete faith in Kenny Pickett, although that there's going to be a very healthy competition come training camp. Whomever they bring in, we know that Mitchell Trubisky was shown his walking papers there and got cut sometime last month, and Mason Rudolph is a free agent. I'm sure they're going to keep an eye out to maybe even bring back Rudolph, but who knows? Based on that small stretch at the end of the year, maybe Rudolph is looking to get a starting job somewhere else in the league because we all know there's a dearth of good starting quarterbacks in the NFL. But I have to hear Stephen A. Smith go crazy about, how can you bring Kenny Pickett back? He is not the starter, blah, 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 based on what Omar Khan said. What is Khan going to say? He's going to say, I feel like this is going to be a healthy competition, but I don't know about Kenny Pickett. Is he going to denigrate his former number one pick? And I understand it wasn't on his watch. I believe that was still on Tom Donahoe's watch. I believe that was his last year as GM of the Steelers before he moved on. But really, Stephen A., what is Khan supposed to say here? He's supposed to throw his quarterback overboard? And I understand he's frustrated, maybe as a Steelers fan. How can you have Pickett as a starter? He can't stay healthy. He hasn't shown you he's the guy. All right, is that valid that he hasn't shown he's the guy? Fine. But again, what is Khan supposed to say? Stephen A., I understand it's the bluster and all the, as he likes to use the word, bloviate about his Steeler team, so on and so forth. But come on. The GM is going to be as even keel and try to be as positive as possible. Whether the Steeler fan likes to hear that, that's another story. But come on. What more is Omar Khan going to say there other than pretty much shipping his quarterback out the door by him saying that, yes, I have faith in this guy, but there's going to be a healthy competition. Did he miss that comment, Stephen A.? And then lastly, do I even have to get into this whole thing with Mecole Hardman? I talked about it last week where, as a member of the Jets, he came out to say to Patrick Mahomes and the Chief GM, hey, come get me, as he voiced his displeasure in a podcast about his short tenure as a member of the Jets. And as it was, he did get traded to Kansas City, as we know, and he caught the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. But now there's a report being published that former Jet teammates have actually accused him of leaking game plans to opponents, and I believe one was the Chiefs and the other was the Eagles. And funny enough, the Eagles actually lost to the Jets. That's when the Eagles were 5-0. Remember the last big Jet win that we saw? And I understand they beat the Texans later on in the season, but who these teammates are, who are the guys that were calling out Hardman on the carpet, I'd like to know. Can you attach a name to the source there? I'm sure you had the one source or one Jet player said, come on, let's hear it. But for Hardman, who vehemently denied, and in particular about his character. So for him to even come out and say that, never have I shared any type of game plans with opponents. I want to beat my opponents as much as my teammates do. And on top of that, now you're taking a shot at my character. And all right, it's easy to say that. It'd be better if he had a microphone in front of him and maybe get his reaction, his expression. And I'm sure he probably would feel the same way. I'm not trying to knock or even think that that's not the case. But anybody could type something on his phone or keyboard on a laptop to say, this is untrue, blah, 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 no way. All right, we'll have to take his word for it. But until you get a camera and a microphone in his face and really get the full truth and body language, etc., I guess we just have to take him for his word, give him the benefit of the doubt, and that if he was accused of doing that and has denied those accusations, then therefore, I guess he's innocent. For lack of a better word or term or whatever. And sadly, I guess that's how I have to close out this podcast, because that's all I have, people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by. 6th anniversary. We had that there on Friday. And I appreciate each and every one of you. Whether you're my day ones or this is your first day, you know that I am just extremely thankful, grateful for carving out precious time and minutes out of your day to listen to what it is they have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review. Throw me a few stars, write a review. You know the deal. Increase the visibility. Let everybody know, family, friends, frenemies, foes, etc. in your life to tune in, not only here, whether it's Apple, Spotify, jreels.com, any podcast platform, but of course on YouTube for the visually inclined. At JReels is the channel. If you want to hit me up with any questions, comments, or suggestions, on YouTube at JReels, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, X, JReels1, just a number, or the old-fashioned way, the JReels Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, so please send me that question, comment, suggestion, whatever it may be, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. If you couldn't tell, I don't know what else to tell you. I'm going to have to scream even louder or get my point across here in front of this camera, because the fire, passion, energy, fury that I exude into this microphone through your earbuds, headphones, speakers, or even through your phone, tablet, television, doesn't matter. I got you guys and gals covered. Full-time content creator. This is what I do, people. So all the support is much appreciated. That's why I said spread the word. Because I will continue, as long as I'm alive and breathing, to deliver nothing but my thoughts, opinions, critiques, analysis, praise, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JReels Podcast, on the flip, baby.